A very dangerous storm system is set to impact the United States over the next few days with significant severe weather ahead, including the risk of damaging winds, very large hail, and a few tornadoes. So in today's forecast, we are going to break down exactly what you need to know about the weather that'll be impacting the United States over the next 7 days. And we'll begin with what's happening across the country today. And right now, we have a ton of storms that have been ongoing over the last 12 hours back over in the central and northern plains. And all of this energy will be moving into the Midwest later today, and this is going to lead to another significant round of severe weather, one of which will be in the Midwest and another one back over in the central plains. And this is only the beginning of a multi-day severe weather event, which is all beginning in the Great Plains in the Midwest today and will move all the way as far east as the East Coast, the Ohio Valley, and as well as the Great Lakes region as we go into Wednesday and Thursday. Now let's talk more about the severe weather potential for the next few days, beginning with today, which is Monday, and we have a double barrel enhanced risk of severe weather, one of which is across Nebraska and another one across Minnesota and eastern South Dakota. We also have a large slight risk that extends back into Montana and Kansas, and a marginal threat that also goes into Wisconsin, where all hazards of severe weather will be on the table today, including the threat of significant damaging winds, especially across Nebraska, where we are expecting initially a few supercells, but it will eventually turn into a line of thunderstorms, which will lead to a more widespread potential for damaging winds between 60 to 75 miles per hour this afternoon and evening. Very large hail is going to be one of the biggest concerns if you're back over in Minnesota, including the Twin Cities and also into southeastern South Dakota, where hailstone sizes could be as large as the size of apples today. So make sure that you are protecting your vehicle. There's also a chance for a few tornadoes. We have a large 2% tornado risk across Minnesota and also back into Montana. I do want to point out, though, that we do have a 5% tornado risk, which means it's a more elevated threat for a few tornadoes across Minnesota. I also wouldn't be surprised if they do expand this a little bit further to the north, and I also would not be surprised if we end up getting a 10% hatch tornado risk for this risk today back over near the Twin Cities, where an isolated strong tornado definitely cannot be ruled out, but it's going to depend on how fast that morning convection can clear out of the Midwest. If it can clear out fast enough, we will likely be talking about the potential for at least a few tornadoes, maybe even a small-scale tornado outbreak. And then as we head into Tuesday, the threat of severe weather will continue to stay very elevated back over in the central plains in the Midwest, where more scattered to numerous severe storms are likely, especially if you're over near Kansas City or even in central Kansas, where we have another enhanced risk of severe weather in place, where significant damaging winds, very large hail, and tornadoes will be possible. We also have a slight risk that kind of looks like a bean that goes from Iowa back into southeastern Wyoming. So right now, the biggest concerns for Tuesday will be damaging winds, where we have that red area is where numerous damaging winds are likely. Large to very large hail is also a big concern, especially out of the initial supercells that fire during the mid to late afternoon and early evening. And then a few tornadoes are once again going to be a possibility. Right now, we have a 5% tornado risk outlined across many areas in central and eastern Kansas, just outside of Kansas City, and the 2% tornado risk goes up towards Des Moines in Iowa. And then as we go into Wednesday, the threat of severe weather continues, and I honestly think we have another chance of an enhanced risk of severe weather on Wednesday. And before getting too far into the details, I do think Wednesday has the potential to be a severe weather outbreak. Definitely would not be surprised if we get another enhanced risk of severe weather. If we were to get one, it would probably be somewhere around St. Louis all the way back up into southwestern Michigan, but generally speaking, we are at least expecting scattered severe storms with all hazards on the table, including damaging winds, hail, and a few tornadoes. The biggest concern, if you're just to the south there of St. Louis, back all the way through central Oklahoma and North Texas, will be large hail and damaging winds. I think the greatest tornado threat will be in this corridor here, so around St. Louis all the way back up into the Great Lakes region there, just southwest of Kalamazoo. So here's the timing for severe weather today. One of the biggest question marks will be the morning convection, and we do have some storms out there this morning, but assuming they fizzle out by around lunchtime, we are going to have a very primed environment, especially across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and far northern Iowa, where we will have plenty of wind shear and instability, where we could end up seeing a small-scale tornado outbreak, assuming that we get some discrete supercells, and again, assuming that there's no morning convection, because this will keep things unstable. So right now, the thinking is right around 1 to 2 o'clock is when we'll start to see supercells fire off, especially to the south and west there of Duluth, and then also back over in northern Minnesota, we should have a cluster of storms ongoing. The greatest concern with that northern cluster will be large hail and damaging winds, but this is the area that we need to keep an eye on for a growing tornado risk beginning around 2 to 3, but it will really ramp up, I think, by 4, 5, and 6, which is when we'll likely be live on this channel covering this, so make sure you're subscribed down below. By around 4 to 5, these storms are going to be moving into western Wisconsin. Notice how we only have a couple right now being shown on the HRRR, and then also a few back over in northern Minnesota, but keep in mind that this is not going to be much of a tornado threat. It'll be more wind and hail driven. Nonetheless, still significant, just not as much much of a tornado risk there. This is really the key activity that we need to be keeping a close eye on during the afternoon. And then by the early evening hours is when a line of storms will likely start to form across areas near the Twin Cities, and this would be capable of significant damaging winds and a low tornado risk. I do want to point out though, even though the HRRR is not showing any sort of discrete supercells near the Twin Cities, that does not mean it will not happen. But again, it is a bit more conditional. It is not a guarantee that we are going to see a storm fire down there, but if one were to, it is a very favorable environment for at least hail and wind, if not maybe even a tornado or two. By around 7 to 8 o'clock tonight, we have a full-blown line of thunderstorms moving across Wisconsin and southeastern Minnesota, and then a bunch of storms will be firing off across Nebraska and northwest Iowa, where there will be a low-end chance for a tornado initially, but I think more than anything, a lot of wind and hail will come out of these storms. And then eventually after midnight tonight, all the storms are mostly over into Kansas and southern Nebraska, and then a few will be left over if you're back over in the Midwest. And if you're back over in the Midwest, a broken line of thunderstorms will be moving through central Wisconsin by around 11 o'clock tonight. Should fall apart by the time it gets towards Milwaukee and Chicago. And then as we go into Tuesday morning, things are a bit drier, but again, that'll eventually not last. We are going to see more severe weather on Tuesday and also on Wednesday in the Midwest. And then back over in the Central Plains, a broken line of thunderstorms will be moving to the south as we get closer to midnight. It will be approaching Kansas City more than likely around 3 to 4 in the morning, but I don't really think there will be much severe weather left. I think this is going to run out of energy fairly quickly after trying to organize, and then by the early morning hours on Tuesday, there will be some scattered showers and thunderstorms, and then eventually we should see another significant severe weather event take place here on Tuesday. And speaking of Tuesday, let's talk more about it. This is what it looks like during the middle of the afternoon by around 4 to 5 o'clock. We'll have a line of storms already ongoing across northern Colorado, western Nebraska, southwestern South Dakota, where damaging winds will be the primary hazard, but an isolated discrete supercell may fire up out in front of that line, and if that does happen, we could see an isolated tornado. But really the bigger story is going to be what's going to be happening over in Kansas, and a lot of these storms right now are forecasted to fire off after sunset across central Kansas. So notice how we have some big supercells initially with the potential for very large hail, damaging winds, and even an isolated tornado or two. Would not rule out a strong tornado with one of these storms, but notice by around 9, 10, 11 o'clock, we're going to be talking about a large cluster of thunderstorms here that is going to form across central Kansas, where all hazards will still be possible, but the biggest concern being hail and wind. And on top of that, there will likely be significant flooding, especially if these storms are not moving very much, which right now it does not look like they will be moving much here on Tuesday night. And eventually, as we go closer to midnight, these storms will congeal into probably one line of storms moving towards Kansas City and western Missouri. I don't think it's going to make it super far into the overnight hours. I think it'll probably weaken by around 4 to 5 in the morning as it gets closer to Springfield, but definitely still stay weather aware in case for whatever reason the forecast does change here, which is entirely possible with a line of thunderstorms like this. And then back over in the Midwest for Tuesday, we are only expecting really just isolated to scattered severe storms during the afternoon hours. We'll likely just see a cluster form back over in southern Wisconsin and western Illinois. Biggest concern here being damaging winds, maybe a very low tornado risk, but it will probably stay very low with this being very disorganized. And eventually by around 7 to 8 o'clock, this will continue to push towards Michigan, Indiana, and central Illinois, where I'm really not anticipating a whole lot of severe weather out of this complex of storms after about 6 o'clock on Tuesday. Now, as we go into Wednesday, things could definitely get very interesting across the Midwest and back through the Ozarks, as we are expecting an intensifying low pressure system to move into the Midwest. And right now, the Rufus model, which is not a model that we usually use, but at least depicts right now that there could be several discrete supercells, and at the minimum, at least a lot of thunderstorms out there. So I do think, generally speaking, we'll be talking about at least a significant hail threat, especially back over near Chicago, in addition to damaging winds. But if we end up seeing any discrete supercells in this environment, we do have pretty favorable conditions in terms of wind shear and instability, and also our low-level jet coming out of the southwest to be able to intensify the potential here for tornadoes. So definitely something we need to keep an eye on Wednesday here. This would be during mostly the afternoon hours. It will likely continue into the evening, but more as a wind threat, maybe an isolated supercell still going by around 7 to 8 o'clock. And then eventually, as we go into the late evening hours, all these storms will start to weaken as they move across the Great Lakes in the Ohio Valley. The only good news right now about Wednesday's event is that most of it will be during the daytime, but unfortunately, it does look like it could be on the more significant side of things, so definitely make sure that you're staying weather aware. And if you're back over in the southern plains, we are expecting a bunch of storms to fire off from about Wichita Falls back into northern Arkansas. However, a lot of these storms will be hail and wind driven, really not much of a tornado threat down to the south there of Springfield, Missouri. But definitely make sure that you're staying weather aware, as it could definitely get a little bit dicey, especially if you have a car outside. Make sure that you're protecting that, and any sort of loose line items, I would also make sure that you are protecting those. And then beyond Wednesday of this week, we are expecting another round of severe weather as we go into Thursday across parts of the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. And I do think significant severe weather will will be in play in eastern Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, many other states as well, where all hazards of severe weather would be on the table, including damaging winds, hail, and maybe even a few tornadoes. On Friday, I think we get a little bit of a break from at least significant severe weather, but by Saturday is when I think things start to ramp back up again. It is a little bit conditional for right now, but northern plains, Midwest, we are going to have a ton of ingredients in place for all hazards of severe weather, but it will depend on our trough ejecting, and right now it does not really appear as if it is going to be making much of an attempt at that on Saturday, but possibly by Sunday or Monday is when we start to see some big storms form here across areas in the northern and central plains in the Midwest, which should lead to, again, to a fairly active weather pattern here for the remainder of June. Definitely make sure you stay tuned, make sure you subscribe to the channel, as we are expecting a bunch of live streams here over the next couple of weeks. On top of that, there will basically be videos every single day, as we are expecting a very active stretch of weather.